Welcome to Creating and Binding Data Sources with Enterprise Services. In this video, we will be creating data sources from TM1 views and subsets we published using Enterprise Services, and then bind them to the controls on our web page. We will be using LINQ data sources to provide the data management layer between our web services and the controls they are bound to. From our prototype, we need 3 data sources for the drop-downs and 1 for the grid, so we will go to our toolbox and add a LINQ data source. Now we can select this data source and copy it 3 more times. We will use the first data source to associate the version dimension with the version drop-down. Let's click on it and find the ID, and then label it DS version. Now we can click on the second data source and label it DS business unit. The next one we will call DS year, and then the last one we'll call DS planning. So we have all the data sources we need, and we are ready to put the code in for binding them to the controls. Before we can use the web service, we need to first add a reference to the web service. So we right-click on the references in the Solution Explorer and select Add Web Reference. In the URL box, we can type in the URL address of Enterprise Services. In our case, it is http localhost esweb.asmx, and then click on the green Go arrow, and this will bring back a list of all the web service methods that Enterprise Services provides. The list of methods are controlled by the system administrator, so yours may not look the same as what you see here. Generally, though, you'll see a list of standard TM1 functions along with the views and subsets and processes that have been published. I'm going to change the name of the web service to ES and then click Add Reference. So with the web reference in place, we can go to our code behind for this web page and define and initialize it so that it can be used in our code. At the class level, we will need to define an Enterprise Services Web Service object, which is es.esWebService, and we'll call it WS. We also need to define an error object where we can obtain the status and detailed error information of the web service call. This is defined as es.eserrorinfo, and we'll call it ERR. Now in the page load event, we can instantiate the web service by typing ws equals new es.esWebService. Okay, now we're ready to take the results of the web method call and bind it to the controls using a LINQ data source. So let's go back to the design page, and we'll double click on the version data source to generate the selecting event for us. A published subset will be returned as an array object, which is directly consumable by a LINQ data source. So let's get the results of the version subset by typing es.versionResults, and we will put it into a variable called results, and this is equal to ws.version. And the next parameter is what we would use to capture the execution information, so we type out ERR. Using the error object, we can see if the results were successful. So we type if err.success, then set the results of the array returned from the version method call, results.version members, and then close the if. Now let's repeat this process for the other two dimensions. So we return back to the design page and double click on the business unit data source. This is a bit of a misnomer here because the dimension is the business unit dimension, but we're actually pulling a list of departments. So we get the results into the results variable, and then check for success. If we have it, then e.results is this time equal to results.departments members. Okay, that looks pretty good. Lastly, we can return back to the design view and repeat this for the years data source, and we get the es.years results into ws.years, and again we don't forget about the error info. Now let's check to see if the execution was successful, and if so, let's set the e.results to results.years members this time, and then finish things up here, and we're all set. Okay, so at this point we're going to take a look at the web page, and we're going to bind to the version drop-down by choosing data source and then selecting the version drop-down, and now we enter in the fields that will be used for the display and the ID. The fields you enter here correspond to the attributes that are brought back for each member of the published subset. Enterprise Services automatically brings back name and ID for you, but you can specify any of the attributes that you define in the published subset. Let's move on now to the business unit and choose data source, and again we select the business unit and choose the name as well as the ID fields, and then select OK, and then finally we'll get to the year, choose DS year, type in the name and the ID fields, and then choose OK. Alright, we're now ready to preview our form, so it'll build it here, and then it will connect to Enterprise Services, which will pull the data from TM1 and bring it into our form. And so here are our drop downs for the version and business unit, and then for the year. Okay, this concludes creating and binding data sources part 1. In the next video we will create a LINQ query and bind it to the data grid.